Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Wednesday, March the 27th, 2024. We're looking at the gospel reading from this past Sunday, Mark 14, 3 through 9, the anointing at Bethany. I want to kind of focus on verses 4 and 5 today, which read as follows. Of course, in response to verse 3, where the woman came, broke open that alabaster jar of very costly ointment, and poured it on Jesus's head. Verse 4, but some were there who said to one another in anger, why was the ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor. And they scolded her. It's interesting to note that we're going to talk about the Luke 7, which is sort of the outlier, the different telling of that story, although, as I shared yesterday, I do think it was one event that was used in a couple of different ways. But here it's this idea of the 300 denarii. Just as a way of thinking about it, denarii was about a day's wage, for an average worker. So federal minimum wage is what, $7.25 times 8-hour day, although they surely work longer than that then, but just for the sake of argument, that's $58 a day times 300 days, which would be a year's wage, is about $17,000 in today's federal minimum wage. A jar of ointment worth $17,000 is even not cheap. If you go by the current New Jersey minimum wage of $15.13, that works out to $121 a day times 300. That would be $36,312. Again, a very large sum. It's interesting that Mark and John mention the figure 300 denarii. Matthew's gospel simply says it could have been sold for a large sum, but they all agree that it could have been used for the poor, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, especially tomorrow. But I came across Elizabeth Johnson had some interesting things to say about this. She writes, some of Jesus's dinner companions are offended by such extravagance. That jar of ointment could have been sold for 300 denarii. They figure a whole year's worth of wages, and the money given to the poor. Their objection makes sense. Why waste this whole jar of ointment in one act of devotion when so much good could have been done with the money it was worth? And she goes on to say, well, how might this text speak to hearers today, to us today? One angle worth considering, she points out, is that the objection of Jesus's table companions to this woman's act of devotion could be seen in light of ongoing debates in churches about how best to allocate resources. Can we justify spending large amounts of money to beautify the sanctuary, for example, when there's so many other needs for which the money could be used, like feeding the hungry and housing the homeless? It's not quite the same, but here as we're considering the possibility, and who knows whether we'll expand our building. Of course, the reason for that is not simply to enjoy a larger building for ourselves, but to do more ministry. But that's a huge expense, potentially. And, couldn't the money be spent better? Well, she goes on to say, it's important to note that in his response to the women's critics, Jesus' remark about the poor uses the present rather than the future tense. You always have the poor with you, and you can do good to them whenever you wish. A lot of people, and I was talking to somebody recently who said, Jesus said, you will always. No, he doesn't say you will always. He said, you always. The you will always kind of makes it sound like, well, all right, they're always going to be there, so if you don't help them now. But Jesus' point here is more like, you always have them, and now is as good a time as any, to help them. You can do good to them. Again, she says too often the verse has been interpreted as though the verb is future tense, you will always have the poor with you, as though to throw up our hands and say that poverty cannot be solved, so we are excused for our inaction on behalf of the poor. Jesus offers no such excuse. Again, he says in the present tense, you can do good for them whenever you wish. Criticizing how others use their resources can easily serve as a deflection from examining our own lack of generosity, she says. Perhaps that's the problem. Jesus sees in his dinner companion's objections. A paraphrase of his remarks might be, you're not lacking in opportunities to help the poor, so go ahead and get to work. But as for this woman, leave her alone, for she has performed a good, beautiful service for me. Jesus praises this extravagant act of the woman who anointed him with costly, fragrant ointment because he sees it as an extraordinary act of love. Love is not reasonable or restrained, she says. Love gives fully, completely, lavishly. Is it any wonder that Jesus speaks in this way? This is the same Jesus who has been speaking throughout his ministry about the extravagant, even scandalous love of God. The same Jesus who pours out his life for us on the cross. Jesus praises the woman who anoints him because her loving act of devotion reflects the divine love that he makes real for us. It is love that holds nothing back, love that is costly, scandalous, and lavish in giving. Well, I want to say a little bit more about that in relationship to the poor and how we could be using our money now. But save that for tomorrow. Hope you have a great day today. We'll talk again tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.